Hello everyone and welcome to SuttonsDaze. I hope that you're enjoying what we're putting out, and I hope that if you do, that you subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you know when a new video comes up. We do it pretty often around here. A large amount of what we put out is home food preservation and preparedness. That's what we do. Today I thought we would chat a little bit about staying home. What? We've been staying home for almost a year, Lisa. I know, but that's why it's so important. About a year ago, they said, time to stay home. And it caught a lot of people off guard, okay? A lot of people don't have everything that they need at home to see them through for any extent of time. A lot more people are on board now with making sure that they have at least some of the supplies needed so that they don't have to fight the crowds during an emergency. An emergency can come in all shapes and sizes, depending on where you live or what is happening in the world around us. It can be blizzards, it can be earthquakes, it can be hurricanes, it can be pandemics. And each one of those will require a little something different, but we have basically 6 things here that you can focus on to try to make it so that if you do have to stay home, you have what you need to do so. FEMA recommends a 72-hour kit, having enough supplies, enough stockpile on hand for each person in your home for 72 hours. Now remember, that includes your pets too, okay? FEMA recommends having enough of a stockpile for each person in your home for 72 hours. That's 3 days to have enough food, water, medication, any kind of supplies that you may need to make you more comfortable and to survive an emergency for 72 hours. That's the minimum, okay? That is the absolute last drop in the bucket minimum that you should be prepared for. I'm a firm believer that if you're just starting out, shoot for that 3 days. Once you have that 3 days, you kind of got your feet a little wet, you got used to what's going on. Now let's shoot for 2 weeks, okay? 2 weeks, reasonably comfortable for most emergencies, okay? Once you get those 2 weeks done, let's shoot for 3 months, and then 6 months, and then a year. It can be done. It really can be done. It is not going to happen overnight, but it can be done. And when you look at a 3-month supply, it really is not difficult, and it's not very expensive. It can be very budget friendly. So we're going to take a look at some of those things. There are essentially 6 categories that you can lump things into for figuring out what you need to prepare and then determining how much you need to prepare to stay home. Okay, remember, this is to stay home. This is what we're focusing on this week. So the 3 categories are water, food, emergency medical supplies, first aid kits, that kind of thing, tools or emergency supplies, clothing, bedding, and then there's those special things, those special need items that are specific to you and your household and the things that you may need that say I may not need. The powers that be recommend that we drink every day no less than 2 quarts of water. Now when you're looking at your canning jars, folks, okay, that's not a lot of water. That's easy enough to take in. And that's during typical normal weather. If it's really hot out, it can be anywhere from 4 to 5 quarts of water necessary just to prevent dehydration. That is very important. Once you become dehydrated, you have a whole multitude of issues that can happen, and you don't ever want to go there. No coffee doesn't count, no tea doesn't count, soda doesn't count, water. It really needs to be water. And I understand the struggle for drinking water, I really do, but it's really important that we make that effort to try to get in at least 2 quarts a day. But when it comes to stockpiling, we need to figure out the minimum, which is 2 quarts a day per person. Now, they do recommend a gallon a day per person to stockpile. That has always been the standard. But at the very least, 2 quarts. But that is for actually drinking, not for anything else. That's not for cleaning, and that's not for cooking, and that's not for anything else. So that's why I always suggest a gallon per person per day. And that's what you need to figure out. So if you have one person, super simple. That's 7 gallons of water to get you through a week, okay? Multiply that for each person. And don't forget about your pets. Please don't forget about your pets, because they need water just as much as you do. It's very, very important that you have it on hand. There are any number of ways to store it, and that again is going to depend largely on where you're located, because storing water in our garage is not an option here in the north because it gets too cold, it'll freeze. But we can store water in our breezeway, which relatively stays around refrigerator temperature, okay? Or we can store it in the house in certain locations. Water is heavy. So if you're planning on storing a whole bunch of it, you want to make sure that the foundation underneath it is secure and can hold that amount of weight. They always, I'm no contractor. Don't ever mistake me for a contractor. But if you, when they put in bathtubs and those big bathtubs, that kind of thing, the foundation underneath them is always significantly more than it is in, say, a bedroom. Okay, so you want to make sure that the foundation that they are sitting on is extra secure and can handle that weight. It needs to be out of the cold, and it should be out of the heat also. If you have no other option but to store them in your garage, then you want to make sure that there's plenty of room for expansion and that you have a way to bring them in and let them defrost so that they're actually usable as far as potable water. You can save gray water in different containers, and that if you're like us where we're on a septic, we don't have city water and city sewer, then you will need that in order to make certain things flush, okay? But for potable water, you want to make sure that you've got a great safe place to use it. It's very, very important. There are a bunch of different options. I highly recommend that you just get on the internet and do some searching for it and see what works best for you. I am not a huge fan of the, what do they call it? A bob? I think a water bob. And it goes in your bathtub and you fill it up. Number one, that's a whole lot of space. Number two, it's very last minute. It's not something that you would leave sitting in there. So, you know, if you're good with being able to handle an emergency last minute, then I would recommend those. Otherwise, look at the bricks, look at the 50-gallon drums, look at a multitude of options that you have for storing water. You want to keep it out of direct light, and you want to keep it someplace temperate. Okay, so if you have a basement, it's a great option. When it comes to water also, you're going to want to consider possibly being not able to use what is available outside. If you run out of what's in your home and you need to acquire it from outside, you may want a water filtration system. These are easy enough. Anything from a Berkey, regardless of what size, or an Alexa Pure, to something like a Life Straw. That can make the difference between having the water that you need and not. As always, food is on the list. You know, that's what we do here. We preserve food and we stock the pantry. And having a decently stocked pantry, it doesn't have to start out as a year's worth of food. Please don't do that, because you need time to develop what it is that you should stock. But there are basics that you can have in case an emergency crops up on you. These basics should be shelf stable. While I am a huge advocate of freezers and refrigerators for certain things, the bulk of your food storage, I really believe, should be shelf stable. Because if the power goes out during a hurricane or an earthquake or a winter storm, you're going to need a way to get to your food and have it usable. You don't want it to go bad at that point. So having shelf stable food is imperative in my mind. That's everything from dehydrated to freeze dried to home canned to store bought. There is no right or wrong in any of it. It should be what you eat, only what you eat. Don't buy things that you don't. There are a lot of people that love ramen. We discovered this when I discussed it before. I'm not a fan because I find it to be remarkably unhealthy. But for that reason, I won't bring ramen into the house. It wouldn't work for me. It's not something that we use. It's not something that I ever consider us potentially eating, seriously, unless it's really, really, really bad, you know. But at that point, I've already got different food to handle. So, but if ramen is something that you use, stock up on it. That's super inexpensive, and find ways that you can add things to it that make it slightly more healthy. Only stock what you eat, and then make sure that you have it in rotation and eat what you stock. Having the right kind of foods to be able to sustain you during an emergency on every aspect. During an emergency, you need to not only consider sustenance, but there's also emotional sustenance. Sometimes having those chocolate bars tucked away that nobody knows about can help calm everybody down, okay? So there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can bring certain foods into your food storage that will make people much calmer. So now we've got water and we've got food. Number 3 would be your medical supplies, your first aid kit. If at all possible, make sure that you've got at least a very basic first aid kit, okay? That includes bandages and maybe a way to stitch something up if you need to, and gauze and tape. Has a little pair of scissors, you know, some first aid cream of some kind. Just the basics that you need for those little off emergencies. As time goes on, if you are as lucky as we have been, okay, then you can add things to your first aid kit. We have a very extensive first aid kit now because we have learned different things due to different emergencies about what we can use, what we can't use, what makes sense to keep, what doesn't make sense to keep. No, I really don't need every little gadget that they've got in the ER room, but some of these things I might like to have for future possibilities, right? It also includes medication. Now, medication gets a little tricky because your doctors don't like to give you extra. I see their reasoning. But if you can switch your prescriptions to 90-day refills, if they'll allow you, make sure that you've always got some on hand. Try to stock up on over-the-counter medications. Be aware of their best buy / expiration dates because some of them do decrease in their effectiveness once they get kind of old. But you know, if you know flu season's coming this year, stock up on some flu medication. Look for it when it's on sale. Get extra Motrin or ibuprofen. Get extra acetaminophen. You know, aspirin. Just the simple basic stuff that you may not use all the time, but it would be good to have around in case of an emergency so that you don't have to go out and get it. Simple things like this will make an emergency much easier to deal with. I can remember when Phil had his accident with his first thumb, where I was woefully inadequately prepared. My first aid kit was sad. And when I realized that the EMS person, when he told him where to find it, and I'm like, oh, this is just so bad. I'm going to work very hard to make sure that I get a much better first aid kit. Because I thought that we had what we needed. We didn't, okay? So it's just things to take a look at. A lot of these items you can buy at the dollar store. I mean, I regularly stock up on gauze. You want to make sure to get the kind that doesn't stick. You want to try to make sure that you get some decent tape to go around to hold things. Ace bandages are always helpful to have around. There's a whole list, and we may delve deeper into those lists as we go, but take a look at your first aid, your medical supplies. What is unique to you and yours that you should have on hand? Very important to have a stockpile that you can rely on. There are different emergency supplies and tools that we can all find, locate, purchase, whatever the case may be, make in case of an emergency. One of my favorites always is my little handheld crank radio, okay? I don't need electricity to charge it. I can crank it up. It can bring in AM, FM, NOAA. It has a light on it. It can charge my cell phone in an emergency. And, you know, it just is one of those all-in-one tools that just give me that little bit of security. We actually have a few of them located around the house now because you just never know. You just never know. Things like a radio. Tools like the Fondue Pot. I've mentioned it a million times. A Fondue Pot is something that's super simple, multi-purpose, that shouldn't cost much. You can pick them up in thrift stores most of the time for pennies, but it's a simple, easy way to be able to heat up food if you don't have electric or gas to do so, or don't have a grill to do so. You can easily heat up some soup or anything else in a Fondue Pot and have a simple dinner, okay? So having the tools to cook your food, having the tools to get communications of some kind, having the tools, flashlights, in order to see in the dark. There are different tools that we'll all discover as we go along that we either do use or don't use. Might be nice to have on hand in case. Fire starters, matches that are vacuum sealed so that nothing can get to them. There's a whole bunch of things, but sit down and spend some time thinking about those emergency tools that will help you get through. And I include the emergency tools. I include a life straw with mine because if I need it, it's there. So I've got them in multiple places throughout the house. They're not just located in my pantry because I want them to be accessible in case of any kind of emergency. Just like the flashlights, just like the radios. It's good to have multiple if you can, if it makes sense for you. Next is something that a lot of people don't give a lot of thought to, but believe it or not, clothing. Clothing or linens like blankets, especially if you're living in a colder climate, having extra of these in a kit that's easy to locate is huge. Having extra blankets in case the ones that you use become soiled or have an issue or get wet during, you know, some kind of emergency. It's good to have extra ones put away securely so that you can get to them. Extra socks, extra jackets. And I'm not talking about a whole second wardrobe, just essentials for dealing with extreme weather conditions. A rain poncho, an umbrella if that, you know, if that's more comfortable for you, but something to fend off the weather regardless of what it is. A rain poncho or rain gear is extremely helpful if you're in hurricane weather because things get a little damp down there, okay? Hurricanes, earthquakes, being able to have gloves, extra gloves that you can use. Again, up in the north here, we deal with a lot with the cold weather, so we've got some storms getting ready to come in and some high winds, and normally pretty much if you blink the wrong way, the power goes out here. So being prepared and knowing that these winter storms are coming through, I'm not worried about 5 inches of snow. I'm worried about 35+ mile-an-hour winds that could knock our power out. How is that going to impact us for keeping warm? Do we have socks? Do we have blankets that are ready and easy to get to? Do we have it for everybody in the family? And do we have things that we can use for the pets if needed? These kinds of things are really important. It's amazing what a stocking cap on your head will do to keep the heat in when you're in bed or when you're sitting in a cold house and, you know, in the dark. It's different for everyone. When I lived in Hawaii, I never thought that I'd have a problem with heat, right? And the temperature dipped there for a little while, and I can remember closing all my windows and turning on my oven and hanging in the kitchen because I could not get warm. So it depends on what you're used to in your climate and how you can best prepare for it. It's always better to have a few extra blankets than none at all. The next category, the last one, is your special items that are based on you and yours, okay? This could be if you have babies, it could be extra formula, extra diapers, extra baby wipes. If you have pets, it could be extra food to see you through a long time. It could be extra flea and tick medication, you know, anything like that. Anything that is specific to you and your family that maybe not, you know, everybody needs food, everybody needs water, everybody should have first aid supplies, everybody should have extra clothing. Not everybody has a baby, not everybody has pets. So those kinds of special categories would fit into the special needs item. It's something that you need to sit down and give some serious thought to, especially if you've got, well, little kids. They need something to do. You need something to entertain them. So if you are confined inside the house and your power is out, what do you have to help entertain your kids? Do you have coloring books and crayons? Do you have books that they can read? Do you have games that you can play? Simple things like that can make a bad day a much, much better day. When it comes to your pets, anything that can make them safer. Make sure that you have your collars, make sure that you have leashes. I always like having a couple extra of both. Make sure that if it makes more sense that you have one of those harnesses instead of just a collar. I know for one of our dogs, I feel much safer when she's on a harness because she is Houdini. She can get out of pretty much anything. So in an emergency, I would be putting a harness on her as opposed to a collar that I would put on the other dog. Making sure you have the crates to put them in case you have to block them off for any length of time. Putting your dogs in a crate is not a horrible thing. It actually gives them a sense of security, and you can put a blanket around the top of it so that it helps contain some heat also. It's a good thing, and it's not too bad for the cats either on the short term. As you're developing these emergency kits, whether it's 72 hours, 2 weeks, 3 months, or a year, you will put them someplace where you know they are. Be aware of where they are. Okay, it's very important that in an emergency, you know to go to that one area where those items are, or those 2 areas where they are. We here have the pantry room, most of you know. We have our pantry, and that's where our medical supplies are. That's where our toiletries are, our sundries, or, you know, dry goods. And that's where a lot of our overstocked food, our pantry, you know, food is. But we also have items throughout the house, like the flashlights, like the radios, that we keep in multiple places so that if something happens, they're easy to access. We don't have to stumble around in the dark. And though that's what you want to try to figure out and plan on. The other thing is, if you have more than one person in your house, it's good for everyone to know where everything is. You need them to understand that in an emergency, this is where you go to get these items, because there's always confusion during an emergency. There's always some chaos. And when you think back to almost a year ago now, when they first said stay home, what were your first thoughts? What were your first thoughts about what am I missing? What don't I have enough of? What did you discover that you didn't have enough of? Or things that you thought you had too much of that you found out you didn't have enough of. It takes some thought and some practice, but it's absolutely doable, and it's definitely something you should pull the whole family into doing. Let the kids pick out the things that they would like to tuck into their kits. Get everybody their own Rubbermaid tote of special items, you know. And this is all strictly for staying home. I'm not talking about leaving home yet. This is strictly for staying home. The question is always, do we bug in or do we bug out? Do we stay home or do we evacuate? And for today, we're talking about staying home, because home is where the heart is. It's where the pantry is. And it is more often than not the safest place during some emergencies. And I know we've discussed it before. A lot of us prefer that in any kind of emergency, we would like to stay home because it's an area that we're familiar with. So in order to make it the safest place to be, we need to create these stockpiles that will see us through 72 hours, 2 weeks, 3 months, build from there. Start small, build up from there, and you can do it too. Next week, we will chat a little bit about evacuation, about bugging out. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you a little bit of insight on areas that you should look at when you're building a stockpile, when you're building your emergency kits. An emergency kit does not just have to be a 72-hour kit. It does not have to be just something that fits in a plastic tote. It can be a room. It can be anything that you want it to be that fits your lifestyle. But building an emergency kit to see you through those really tough times when a disaster strikes is really important. And so I hope that this helps you start or further your stockpile, whichever the case may be. Remember, if you like what we do here, please hit that like, subscribe, and share. Check us out on Instagram and Facebook. And until the next time, be safe.